In this video, I'm just going to talk about the various curve creation tools that the Sketcher has. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly make a new sketch inside of this file. This is a brand new part file. There's nothing in it except for all of the default coordinate systems and settings and everything. So I'm going to go in, create my sketch on plane with my horizontal and origin, use just the work part. Select OK. Now that I'm in the sketch, once again, when you create a new sketch, it puts you into the profile tool. Now, to use this profile tool, it's pretty straightforward. You pick a point that you want to start out at. So you'll notice I can either enter in a coordinate system or just simply pick a point. The moment I pick a point, you'll see that the input mode changes. Now it's asking for a length or an angle. And here I can either just draw another point or enter in the values that I want. Because this is the sketch, because we're going to come back later on and apply constraints, we don't necessarily have to pay close attention to the input fields. So for this, I'm just going to click away, random points out in space. Now, once I select my first point, again, it's just a click. It's not click and hold. You're not dragging. So for this, I'm going to move my mouse over, and you'll note that if I click right there, what'll happen is the line will constrain to the horizontal of the sketch. If you look down below in the Q line where it says press MB2 to lock horizontal constraint, basically that's telling you if I click the middle mouse button or the wheel, it'll lock it at horizontal. And that little orange arrow that you see appearing right next to the cursor is indicating that upon creation of the line, it's going to snap to horizontal. So for this, I'm just going to simply come back across and pick a point. You'll notice that as soon as I draw that in, a couple of things happen. I get my horizontal constraint. That's what this little blue little dash is telling me. And then I also get this light gray or lightish blue constraint that appears. And this is what's called an auto dimension. So as you draw things inside of an X, the auto dimensioning basically just starts putting dimensions, guessing, placing things everywhere. And what it ends up with is technically a fully defined, a fully constrained sketch, but with automatically generated constraints. We're going to talk about this in a later video as far as how we go about adjusting these constraints. But for now, I just want to talk about creating curves. So I've picked a couple of points and I'm going to come down. I'm going to pick another point. You'll see I get another constraint. There's my vertical. There is my auto dimension. Now, if I click at an angle, you'll notice that I have an angle constraint and a length as well. I don't have another symbol here because there's no symbol to be had. So I'm just going to move this up a bit and I'm going to move, come down. I can come in either direction. You can see now if I snap here, you'll see that the previous line drawn is now highlighted in orange. This is indicating that it wants to create a constraint to that previous line. And you'll see again by the cursor, I have what's shown as the perpendicular constraint. So the system is automatically trying to generate constraints as you draw things, okay? Now, if I click, you'll see here, I get my perpendicular constraint. There's my auto constraint. I come up, come to the endpoint, and I know I'm getting the endpoint because you'll see that little red diamond appear. So it's snapping to that endpoint. And this is where the selection intent is really important. So if I pay attention to my selection intent, you'll notice it says, hey, I'm snapping to endpoints. This is allowing me to snap to endpoints. So when I go there, it's snapping to that endpoint. Now you'll also note that if I hover, I get this little quick pick that pops up, those little three dots. It's called a quick pick. If I pick, I get a little listing window of the available locations of where I want to drop my endpoint. I can say start point of line or point on curve. They're two different things. If I say point on curve, that means that endpoint can travel along the length of the curve. Whereas if I say at start point, it's going to be locked and coincident to that endpoint or start point in this case. Now you'll notice I still have my little rubber band effect. And as I draw, you can see just moving my mouse, I have potential to make that line parallel to this line here. You can see that it wants to highlight that line and say parallel. Again, the little parallel constraint appears. If you are trying to draw a line and don't want any auto constraints, you can hold the Alt key down on the keyboard and you'll notice that no constraints pop up. The Alt key is a way of saying, I don't want any constraints as I draw. And this is important because oftentimes you're drawing in tight little areas and you have a lot of geometry all around and things want to snap to, and you don't want things to snap to. So just hold the Alt key down on the keyboard and you have your ability to not apply any constraints as you're drawing. All right, so I'm going to finish off that profile and just going to move this over. If I come in now, go back into profiles, other things that I can do with it, I'm going to draw another line. If I want an arc right now at the very end, I can do one of two things. If I click and drag, and I still have my mouse button held down, but as soon as I release it, it's going to remember that I'm drawing an arc. So now I'm no longer holding the mouse button down. You can see I have an arc, and I get this little dial indicator. I can now, based off of where I come pass through, I can get different arcs, different directions. Here's one tangent. If I accidentally got an arc, I didn't want one, I can just come back over here to Profile, select on the line function, and it switches it back to line. Just that easy. Pick my line, and I'm in. If I do want an arc, I can always come back in and say, I want to draw an arc. And you'll notice that it switches it back to arc. So I can either click and drag, or I can use these buttons over here to change the type of line or arc or curve that I'm drawing. Go ahead and put that arc down, draw the next line, come over, and you'll see as I'm drawing, I get these little help lines. This is indicating that these two endpoints, this little dashed line, the very faint dotted line running vertical, is indicating that the two endpoints will be vertically in the same position. So come down and close that out. Once I'm done drawing my profile, I can do, again, one of two things. I can either turn off the profile by hitting that icon, hitting the X here, or I can hit escape on the keyboard as well a couple times, and it gets rid of everything. So that's basically drawing your profile. As far as rectangles go, pretty straightforward. Come in, you have three different methods of drawing a rectangle, two diagonal points, you have by 3 points, and you have, again, from center, and it's with 3 points. So if I use two diagonal points, you can see diagonal point 1, diagonal point 2. I have my horizontal constraint and a bunch of perpendiculars. If I go by 3 points, point 1, point 2, that sets the angle, and then that third point sets the width or the height of that rectangle. So you have various options for that here. Again, I'll just close that out. And I'm just going to Control Z. I'm going to undo these profiles, take me back to a clean slate. Drawing lines, similar to the profile, but you'll notice that I don't have the arc function here. Just pick point to point, point to point. If I want to, I can pick, again, an endpoint. Remember that little red diamond that pops up is indicating that I'm actually constraining right to that endpoint. It's going to automatically associate it to that endpoint. Again, that's that selection intent. If I want, let's say, a middle point, I can come over here to that midpoint. You'll notice that it wants to snap to that midpoint. As soon as I get near it, you'll see it snaps up there. So that means that I'm constraining to that midpoint. And depending upon where I draw my next line, I can either get it perpendicular to there, or if I'm real careful, you'll notice I have a parallel constraint to that top line. So as you're drawing, you really want to pay attention to where you're drawing, because it's easy, very, very easy to accidentally get a constraint that you may not want. I'll be talking about constraints in later videos. We'll show you how you can delete them, change them, apply dimensional constraints and geometric constraints. As far as some of the other options that we have here for drawing curves, you can go to arc, and you'll notice you have 3-point arc and arc by center and endpoints. So if you need 3-point arc, you can pick your start point. Based off of the second point, what you draw, how you draw, determines the type of arc you get. If I come back between those two endpoints, you'll notice I get a start and then midpoint. If I go past that point, you'll notice it's 3 points in a row to get that arc. I'm just going to Control Z on the keyboard to undo that. I also have arc center and endpoints, and this allows me to pick my arc center and then start point, end point for that arc. Circle, pretty straightforward. Circle by center and diameter, as well as by 3 points. So just the way you created arcs, you create circles but it will close off and make a complete circle. So if I were to do 3 points, 1, 2, and 3, you'll notice I have that complete circle. You'll also notice I have a gallery full of additional ways to create curves. So you have polygons and splines and all sorts of stuff. These are all great tools. Get yourself familiar with creating the basic curves first so you understand exactly what you're doing before you start getting into some of those advanced tools, because there's a lot of little tricky bits here and there for some of those other curve functions in the gallery. So just really get yourself familiar with what's going on, get yourself familiar with the additional menus that pop up and how you go about using these basic curve tools. You should basically be able to cover almost every curve that you need with these, or profile that you need with these tools up here.